What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Let's Talk MMA podcast. Hope you guys have an amazing one. It's insane how many fighters pulled out this month. It's not just Khamzat, Conor, and Jamahal Hill. There have been 9 fights this month that have been canceled. Tagir Ulanbekov pulled off the card because he missed weight by over 3 pounds against Joshua Van. That's the 7th time Tagir Ulanbekov has pulled out of a fight. Not just in the UFC, but throughout his entire career. On the Whittaker and Ikram card, Fareed Basharat and Montel Jackson got canceled, as well as Ihor Pereira pulling out against Shara Bullet. Hamza pulled out against Robert Whittaker. And then on UFC 303, Khalil Roundtree pulled out against Jamahal Hill, then Jamahal Hill pulled out against Carlos Ulberg, Conor pulled out against Michael Chandler. It's insane. And the fighter I feel so bad for is Joshua Van more than anyone else, because this is the 4th fight in a row that Joshua Van's fight got canceled. 4 fights in a row, and this guy isn't a top-ranked fighter. He's not a champion. He's not making a lot of money for his fights. He needs every single fight so he can get paid, you know? He's not one of these other guys that can skip a whole year without competing and be all right. Joshua Van's not even ranked yet. He has the skills of a ranked fighter, but his opponents just keep pulling out, except Tatsuro Taira, which I believe they pulled Tatsuro out to fight Alex Perez. Joshua Van needs to be fighting a top 10 opponent. He's not the one pulling out. He's the one that's always willing to show up. I hope he gets all of his show money for all of that. I mean, 4 fights in a row. If you make weight and you do not pull out after, you should be getting your show money regardless. You did show up to fight. You were there. It's your opponent that's pulling out. So why would a fighter who's doing their job get punished because their opponent can't do their job? Does Joshua Van have to go in the sauna and help his opponent cut weight and stuff just for him to get paid? And Tagir should be going up to 135 now. I mean, missing weight by over 3 pounds like that. And the guy's a consistent pullout merchant. Put him up at 135 pounds so he doesn't have this problem anymore. And I do see a lot of people talk about Michael Chandler and that Michael Chandler should not be waiting for Conor. He's wasting time. He's wasting his career and stuff. I agree somewhat, but then I was thinking about where Michael Chandler is at in his career. He's not a guy that's going to be fighting for a title most likely. He's a guy who's older. He's been fighting for a long time. He was the Bellator champion. He fought for the UFC title. He lost to the best fighters he went up against besides Eddie Alvarez, right? Lost to Charles Oliveira, lost to Dustin, lost to Justin Gaethje. Like, his title aspirations at this point are probably over. So for the path that he's going down for his career, these big time fights, exciting contests, electrifying shows and stuff, there's nothing bigger. His prize is actually Conor. His prize is not the belt anymore. Fighting Conor McGregor is like fighting for the championship for him. That is the ultimate goal of the path that he's on currently in his career. So I completely understand why Michael Chandler is waiting to fight Conor even after Conor just pulled out. Now, they're saying that Conor's injury is not bad. You know, he should be able to come back in a couple months. And I think some of the rumors are that he's going to come back for UFC 307, which I think is in October, which is a good thing. You know, if Conor could come back in a few months and not pull out this time, I think there should be another big show there. You know, in a way, with Alex Pereira and Jiri Prochazka stepping in, 303 is going to be a massive card. And then Conor's comeback after, if it happens, and this time we can't be so sure about Conor's return, but if he steps into the cage and Bruce Buffer's announcing him, then you got another big pay-per-view card. UFC 303 got built up a bit off of Conor's name, so it's probably going to still hold a bit of that glamour, right? So when Conor comes back later, that's going to be a big card as well. We got 300, 303, and then maybe 307 if that's the rumored date. 3 massive cards this year that are going to sell big time. And I think Alex Pereira, because of what he's doing, how many times he goes and saves these cards. I think it was 295, 300, and now 303. The guy's literally stepping in every time the fans need him. And every single time, he blows the roof off the place with his performances. I mean, he has to be probably the biggest star in the UFC after Conor McGregor at this point. And 303 is just him and Jiri. Like, nobody else is selling that card. Ortega and Lopez is the co-main event. They're not going to be selling pay-per-views like that. It's all on Pereira and Jiri. And also the fact that Conor was on the card, which will bring more attention on it from the casual fans. But yeah, it seems like a lot of people are happy. Even some people are saying that Pereira and Prochazka is a better fight than Conor versus Chandler. These two guys are active. They're in the prime of their careers, at least in MMA, considering that Pereira's prime years were probably when he was fighting in kickboxing. We got a new co-main event, Ortega versus Lopez, which I think is better than Hill versus Ulberg, to be honest. And it's a very similar kind of fight. I mean, Ortega and Hill are both top-ranked fighters, and they're risking their ranking by fighting a guy lower in the top 15, who both have knockout power, right? So Carlos Ulberg and Diego Lopez are very dangerous prospects or up-and-comers in the rankings, and they can absolutely win their fights too, right? Diego Lopez can beat Brian Ortega. Ulberg could have beaten Jamahal Hill. It's a similar dynamic, but in the featherweight division this time, and arguably more technical fighters than Hill and Ulberg are. Just in this Ortega and Lopez contest, there is a big presence of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu there. They're both great on the ground. But Olberg is still going to be on the card with Anthony Smith. At least Olberg is still on the card regardless. And everybody seems to be happy about the main and co-main event. So it turns out that Khamzat Chimaev had food poisoning. He probably like undercooked his meat or something. Now food poisoning's tough, man. I've had it really bad once where one of my relatives was packaging some deer meat. He didn't make it airtight and the bacteria got in, and I was in the bathroom for a week, man. And I can only imagine trying to cut weight during that. Now, it would be ideal for him to be as healthy as possible, but I wonder if he could have waited a few days and see by the time that he has to start cutting weight if he needs to pull out then or not. It seems like as soon as he got sick, he pulled out of the fight. So I don't know, man. Would it be possible for him to actually compete and maybe he pulled out way too soon? And now we also know another fighter that the UFC called up to fight Whittaker on short notice, and that is Bo Nickal. So firstly, there was Sean Strickland. Understandably, if he turned that down, because why would he take that fight? It makes no sense. Khamzat pulling out is the best thing for him because it secured him a title shot. There would be no reason for Sean Strickland to fight Whittaker on short notice, fly all the way to Saudi Arabia as well. Why would he do that? Then we know about Kamaru Usman, and it's a bit confusing because Usman has said previously he's willing to fight anybody. It doesn't matter who the opponent is. But the early reports were saying that Usman turned down the fight. Ali Abdelaziz came out after and said that Usman accepted the fight, and I believe he manages both Ikram Aliskerov and Kamaru Usman. So I don't know who's telling the truth here. If Ali Abdelaziz is saying that Usman took the fight, it's hard to believe Ali because he's the same guy that said that Usman doesn't want to fight Shavkat or he shouldn't fight Shavkat. Usman came out after and said, yeah, I would fight Shavkat. It seems like he always just has the best interest for his fighters, which is understandable. But can we get Kamaru Usman a full training camp for his next fight? That would be 2 fights in a row where he would step up on short notice if he fought Whittaker. And it would both be at middleweight where he's a welterweight. But now the other fighter they called up was Bo Nickal. Bo Nickal talked about it. And this means they probably called up other fighters as well that haven't spoken about it yet. And Bo Nickal said they called him when he was like at a mountain for some reason. I don't know if he was hunting or hiking, but he said he had bad reception, and because of that, they passed up on him. And according to Bo Nickal, he made it seem like they were really desperate for him to get in there. They wanted Bo Nickal more than anybody else, it seemed like, because they kept texting him. They kept texting him, call us back, call us back, call us back. And then they texted him, it's too late. And he was never able to contact them because he just didn't have reception. Can you imagine though if they were doing the whole breaking up joke? Can't hear you. You're breaking up. That whole thing. But then it seems like they called up Ikram Aliskerov, and Aliskerov took up the fight. It makes sense as to why Ikram is going to be fighting Robert Whittaker in replacement of Khamzat Chimaev. You know, there is a bit of a story between Khamzat and Ikram. The guy is Muslim, so it does make sense for him to headline at Saudi Arabia. And Dana also said it as well. He mentioned how Ikram is Muslim, and that's another thing as to why it makes sense. He was supposed to fight 2 days ago, so he had a training camp, making him the best prepared opponent on short notice. That makes sense to headline Saudi Arabia. And the guys willing to step up. You know, if anybody's willing to step up and fight Whittaker on short notice, give it to them. And it looks like they called up other guys before Ikram. So we have to tip the hat to both Whittaker and Ikram Aliskerov. They're both willing to save the event. Robert Whittaker's been talking about how he wants to fight. He doesn't want to step off the card, and he's willing to fight anybody. Ikram Aliskerov is willing to take it up on short notice. Now, he has a lot to gain and nothing to lose. He beats Whittaker. He's a top contender, 1 win away from a title shot. In fact, him even taking up the fight on short notice is a win for himself. He gains from that, even if he loses the fight. And if he loses the fight to Whittaker, I mean, he's back in the same place he was before. He gets to fight Antonio Tocali or Andre Muniz or something like that. You know, nothing changes for Ikram there. He just gains respect for willing to step up on short notice like that and save the event. But for Robert Whittaker, a lot of people are saying that Robert has nothing to win and everything to lose. That's not entirely true. He has some to gain here. If he beats Khamzat or Ikram Aliskerov or anybody at this point, it puts him in the same position after. If he beats Ikram Aliskerov here, he's going to be 1 win away from a title shot. If he beat Khamzat, he would be 1 win away from a title shot. It doesn't really matter who the opponent is, in my opinion, because I think it still puts him in the same place after. So the gain is not anything too different than before. It's just a bit of the noise that comes with it. You know, beating Khamzat is a bigger deal for a lot of fans because Khamzat's more popular compared to Ikram, who not a lot of people know about him. But I think doing the UFC a favor of staying in the fight, willing to fight Ikram Aliskerov on short notice, would still put him 1 win away from a title shot if he beats Ikram. And that's if, because Ikram Aliskerov is a very dangerous opponent for Robert Whittaker when it comes to his power, his precision with his hands, his impeccable takedown defense, We haven't seen his wrestling offense too much, but if you've seen some of his combat sambo days, the guy has very, very good takedowns. But I do think Whittaker, being as technical as he is, he should be able to beat Ikram Aliskerov, especially on short notice. Ikram is also at a bit of a disadvantage because he's cutting weight again. He didn't cut all the way down to 185 a few days ago, but he was in the process of cutting weight. So he has to rejuvenate himself and get back to the point where he can cut weight again. And this time, be prepared for a 5-round fight instead of a 3-round fight. So competitively, Ikram is at a bit of a disadvantage. Rankings-wise and for his future in the sport, he has really only to gain here. But that's the thing though. The limelight is off of Robert Whittaker for saving the card, and it seems to be mostly on Ikram Aliskerov because there is some criticism on Ikram Aliskerov being picked to step up to fight Robert Whittaker, in that, he doesn't deserve it and he shouldn't be the guy that steps up. Well, as of what we know, they did ask other fighters. Some of them may have turned it down. Some of them got unlucky with being at a mountain during the time. And honestly, I haven't seen too many fighters get criticism for stepping up a short notice. Usually they get a lot of praise for that, whether it's Lando Venata fighting Tony Ferguson, a guy who wasn't even in the UFC, fought one of the best and top-ranked lightweights in the world. Joe Soto, who wasn't in the UFC and fought TJ Dillashaw in a title fight, stepping out on a day's notice. Bobby Green stepping up to fight Islam Makhachev. Daryl Horcher willing to step up and fight Khabib, even though everybody knew Khabib was going to destroy him. Daryl Horcher did get a lot of praise for that, for willing to step up. This is a short notice fight. We're a week away. Well, it was like a week and a half by the time Khamzat pulled out. And anybody who steps in at that point, kudos to them, man. Because the card is better with Whittaker in it than him not in it. I'd rather see Whittaker fight a broomstick than him not being part of the card. And Ikram Aliskerov, being as exciting as he is, always going for the knockout, always going for some kind of finish, very well-rounded, a dangerous opponent, it makes it more exciting than just anybody stepping in. So if this was just like a lay-and-pray wrestler or someone that everybody would think is completely outmatched, it wouldn't be as interesting. But if you look at the betting odds, Robert Whittaker is only a -150, which I find kind of crazy. I think he should be a bigger favorite than that, but the fact that so many people do believe that Ikram Aliskerov has a shot of beating Whittaker already makes it way more interesting than many of the other opponents that could have taken this fight. Because that's the thing, a lot of people do have a misconception on how to assess how good a fighter is. They usually look at rankings or who they beat, when that's not always the best way on looking at how good a fighter is. Ikram Aliskerov is new, right? He's only 2 fights in the UFC, so you can't go off by who he beat right now and by his ranking and stuff. You have to go by his skills and what you see technically from him. That's the best way to assess any fighter's skill level, not by the number that the journalists put next to their name, ranking them in the top 15, because there are some fighters out there who are outside the top 15 that can beat the top ranked fighters as well. For example, Bo Nickal. Bo Nickal right now could beat some top 10 middleweights right now. Joshua Van, who's outside the top 15, can beat some top 15 fighters at flyweight. Even Ikram Aliskerov at middleweight can beat some top 15 middleweights. Peyton Talbot can beat some top 15 bantamweights right now. It's based off of their skill level and what you see from them stylistically and technically in their fights, rather than the number next to their name or who they have beaten. Now, I do think Robert Whittaker is going to beat Ikram Aliskerov. Ikram can get pretty wild with his hands, and he gets off balance sometimes when he's throwing punches. But the one thing that worries me for Whittaker is that he said he doesn't even know who Ikram Aliskerov is. He's never seen him before. And I guarantee Ikram knows who Whittaker is, and he's been watching his fights. So there is that advantage going to Ikram Aliskerov. And man, Whittaker's got to watch some tape on this guy. He's got to watch some of his fights before the UFC, his 2 fights in the UFC, the Contender Series fight. He's got to get very familiar with what this guy can do, because if he doesn't, Whittaker could get blasted out there and knocked out viciously. Ikram Aliskerov is not a fighter to take lightly. But from one middleweight fight to another one, Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya is official. We all knew this was going to be the fight. It's going to be happening on UFC 305 in Perth, Australia. So all the Australians out there, who do you think is going to get more cheers? You think the crowd's going to like Dricus more, or they're going to like Adesanya? And I really wonder how many South African fans are going to be there. If they're going to show up for one of his fights, this is the one to show up for, right? It's against Adesanya. They've got a bit of history together. They don't like each other. Adesanya is one of the greatest middleweights of all time. If Dricus can beat this guy, it's huge for his legacy. And don't they got a football game happening over there around that time? But man, the perfect spot to have that fight was in Africa. If there was going to be an African card, of course, the best time was when Francis Ngannou, Adesanya, and Usman were all champions at the same time. But Dricus and Adesanya, though, this is the biggest fight that can ever happen in Africa. MMA fight, that is. That would have been insane. But the second best place is probably in Australia or New Zealand or something like that. And I don't know who's going to win this fight. It's close. I can see how both guys win. I can see Dricus using his wrestling and submitting Adesanya with his superior Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills on the ground. Adesanya is a way way better striker. It's not even close. Dricus is kind of silly with his boxing, if we're going to be completely honest here. He's very, very reckless with the way he throws his power punches. Strickland could have absolutely schooled this guy if he threw some counter punches. But that's the thing about Adesanya, man. Adesanya's best asset is his ability to counter strike. So I think Dricus has to definitely be a lot more composed with his striking in this one and use it mostly to get takedowns rather than try to knock Adesanya out. Because I think if anybody can submit Adesanya, it is Dricus du Plessis. He has the most dangerous submission skills out of anyone Adesanya has fought. But if we're going to be honest, if Adesanya is on point, he might knock Dricus out very early in the fight because Dricus is aggressive. He puts a lot of pressure. His striking style is perfect for Adesanya to counter. Like, you guys remember that one time he was throwing those overhands, not even looking at Sean Strickland? Strickland sidestepped him and Dricus had to turn around to face him after. If he does stuff like that, if he has his eyes on the ground, throwing overhands, he's getting knocked out. His boxing has to be more fundamental than ever before. Textbook boxing skills, man, and use that to get the takedowns and submit Adesanya. That's the way Dricus most likely wins this fight. And if I'm Adesanya's coach, I am drilling takedown defense on him the entire training camp. And if he gets taken to the ground, getting back up to his feet. That is the entire training camp. Fine-tune the striking skills, not anything too specific against Dricus, but just to keep Adesanya sharp on the feet. It's a close fight, man. Either guy can win that. But over the weekend, we had 3 fight cards. We had 2 boxing cards and 1 MMA card. And the Gervonta Davis and Frank Martin fight was the best of the entire weekend by far. It wasn't even close. And I cannot believe I'm saying that about a boxing fight actually being better than an MMA card. Not only were there no names on the card that kept most of the fans interested, most of the fights were whack, barely any finishes, but I would say the main event, the way that finished was pretty cool, and some of the girl fights were pretty good. Tatsuro Taira is showing to be a very, very good fighter, man. Still undefeated. Just beat Alex Perez, who had an amazing win a few weeks ago. And shout out to Alex Perez for staying so active. But now Tatsuro Taira has to be ranked in the top 10 at the very least. I would think he should be in the top 7 after that. And the way he got that finish was very interesting. He was on his back, grapevining one leg. So he was like hooking around it, tying it up with his own legs, and then leaning to the right side. He wasn't leaning all the way back, which he did do before, but he started to lean to the other side, away from the leg he's grapevining, putting all the pressure on Alex Perez's other leg, and the knee just gives out. I mean, that's very interesting, and I think the Japanese have a name for that technique. I think it's like a, what do they call it? Otetsu lock, I think. But it looks very similar to the Henzo hook. A Henzo hook is something quite similar, but you're not leaning away from the opponent. You're still holding on to them, and with that one hook, you're pulling them to that side, tripping them out. Tatsuro Taira was a little bit different, almost like a modified Henzo hook, with him leaning away and grapevining that leg instead, which looks like it puts a lot more pressure on the knee of the opponent. And 100% you're going to see more fighters doing that. Even Aljamain Sterling talked about it. He doesn't even know what that move is, and he's saying he's absolutely going to start using that. Isn't that something? The former bantamweight champion learning something from Tatsuro Taira. What an honor that is, man. Imagine like you taught someone a technique and they start using it. Now, Tatsuro Taira is not just anybody. You know, he's a very good fighter, but he's so young in MMA. That must feel amazing, man. And then we go to the greatest fight of all time that happened that weekend. Anderson Silva versus the GOAT, Chael Sonnen, in a boxing match. And man, you should have seen the bombs they were throwing at each other. That fight made World War II look like a joke with all the nukes they were setting off in that fight. Haymakers, hooks, full power punches, trying to knock each other out. And man, that fight was awful. Were they fighting for charity, or was it just a gentleman's agreement of an exhibition fight where they pulled on all their punches? There was nothing being thrown. That looked like 2 toddlers fighting each other in a crib. Yo, Chael had that Philly shell going sometimes though. He had that cross guard, showing off his boxing skills a little bit. Anderson would have knocked him out. Chael's technique was so open to counter punches. It was insane. But that was probably the reason he did fight Anderson in a boxing match. He knew that, you know, they aren't going to throw full power punches and stuff like that. Whatever the reason is, I have no idea. But it looked like they weren't throwing 100% power in every single punch, you know? And I'm not going to lie, man. Boxing's been having a very good year. From the Usyk and Fury fight to Gervonta Davis doing his thing, Ryan Garcia versus Devin Haney, Francis Ngannou fighting in boxing against Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder versus Big Bang. Like, such an amazing year for boxing. I'm very surprised. And why is that? What's going on with boxing that they're actually putting on the fights we want to see now? Because for so many years, it was very rare to get two boxers in their prime to fight each other. I don't know too much about it, but people are saying that the Saudi Arabian prince has a big part in boxing doing so well this year. But I don't know. I'm just glad boxing's doing well, man. Alex Pereira talked about how he stepped in and stuff, and he might still be injured. He had broken toes. He was like in Australia promoting something. He's a big guy who cuts a lot of weight to go to 205, but man, this is why he's my favorite fighter. Bro is risking his belt, healing from the injury to save the 303 card, just like he's saving all the others. And Jiri Prochazka is a very dangerous opponent, even if you fought him before. And if he beats Jiri Prochazka again, he has to be one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time, in my opinion. I would say top 5 at that point. You know, you have Jon Jones at number 1. Number 2 is Chuck Liddell. And then after that, it could be really anybody. Maybe Rampage, maybe Dan Henderson, Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture. But Pereira can also be in the top 5 if he beats Jiri Prochazka. I mean, look at the guys he's already beaten. Short career at 205, but the opponents that he's beaten are crazy good. Jan Blachowicz, Jiri Prochazka twice, and Jamal Hill. Actually, maybe not top 5. I mean, yeah, maybe top 5. I don't know. With Tito Ortiz, his competition wasn't really that strong. He has a lot of title defense, but just didn't beat a lot of great fighters. So I could see Pereira being above Tito, but would he be above guys like Dan Henderson, Rampage, and Randy Couture? The only thing about those 3 fighters are they have a lot of losses, but they got longevity. So maybe in the future, Pereira could lose many times at 205, but he's old enough where I don't think he's going to stick around that long, where he's going to rack up like 10 losses or something. I mean, Randy Couture's record is like 20-15, something crazy like that. He's 19-11. But the thing about Randy Couture is he literally fought the best fighters in the world almost his entire career. His 3rd professional fight was against Vitor. Then he fought Maurice Smith, Jeremy Horn, Kevin Randleman. He fought Pedro Hizzle twice, Josh Barnett, Rico Rodriguez, Chuck Liddell a few times, Tito Ortiz, Vitor 2 times after that, Tim Sylvia, heavyweight, Gabriel Gonzaga, Brock Lesnar, Big Nog, and Lyoto. When we're talking about light heavyweight and heavyweight, Randy Couture has fought some of the best fighters ever in those weight classes. Almost like the heavy version of RDA in a sense, except that RDA didn't win multiple belts. But the argument for Alex Pereira against Randy Couture at light heavyweight specifically is that Randy lost to a lot of the best guys he fought, whereas Alex Pereira has beaten everybody he's fought there. Even though it's only 3 different opponents, but those 3 opponents are very good fighters for light heavyweight standards at least. I don't think Pereira's above Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell, in my opinion, is easily the 2nd greatest light heavyweight of all time. But what about Rampage? I usually like to put Rampage as number 3. He was also the light heavyweight champion. He beat guys like Kevin Randleman, Chuck Liddell twice, Ricardo Arona, Murilo Bustamante, Dan Henderson, Vanderlei Silva, Lyoto Machida, and some guys over there in Bellator post-prime. But just like a lot of these older fighters, Rampage lost a lot of fights. So I probably wouldn't put Pereira above Rampage just because of the longevity, you know? Rampage fought against a lot of good fighters for a long time, so I would have to give Rampage probably that number 3 spot right now. And then for Dan Henderson, who's the other all-time great light heavyweight, he beat guys like Lil Nog, Renato Sobral, Murilo Bustamante twice, Vitor Belfort, Vanderlei Silva, Rich Franklin, Michael Bisping, Fedor, Shogun twice, and even Hector Lombard when Dan Henderson was past his prime. But again, Dan Henderson lost to a lot of fighters, man. Most of those fighters were very good, like losing to Vanderlei, Little Nog, Rampage, Lyoto, Rashad, etc., you know? Some of those were split decision losses, but I'd probably hold Alex Pereira at the number 5 spot if he beats Jiri Prochazka, maybe. But then you have maybe Daniel Cormier, Lyoto, guys like that. Shogun. So Daniel Cormier, a light heavyweight alone, he beat an older Dan Henderson. He beat Rumble twice, even though in the second fight, I don't know what Rumble was doing. Like, he even said he was just trying to wrestle Daniel Cormier. He wasn't taking it seriously. He was thinking about retiring regardless. That's why he wanted to test his wrestling. But in the first fight, that was prime Rumble, wasn't looking to wrestle, and was looking to win that title. He beat Gustafsson in his prime as well. Some people don't like to think that Gustafsson was in his prime when he fought DC. They think like his prime ended from the Jones fight, when that's not true. Gus's prime ended after the Glover Teixeira fight. Because remember, he had that long hiatus from May of 2017 to December of 2018 where he fought Jon Jones, and he didn't really look the same. Gustafsson was contemplating retirement multiple times throughout his career. And the only time he didn't really look the same was when he fought Jon Jones again, and all the fights after that. So Cormier beat a prime Alexander Gustafsson. He beat Volkan, which is okay, and that's pretty much it at light heavyweight. So I would not have Daniel Cormier above Alex Pereira at light heavyweight. His career at light heavyweight was actually very, very short. He only had 9 fights at light heavyweight, and 2 of those he lost or had a no contest against Jon Jones. So he has 7 wins at light heavyweight, with only a few of those being very good wins. In fact, you can really only say 2 of those wins were top-notch. The first Rumble win and the Gustafsson win. Every other win does not stack up to beating Jiri Prochazka, Jamal Hill, or Jan Blachowicz. And Daniel Cormier doesn't have that longevity like the other older light heavyweights had, with many, many good wins to be above Alex Pereira. So if Pereira beats Jiri Prochazka again, I'd probably rank him above Daniel Cormier as well. Now, some people say, what about Volkan, though? He's kind of like at a similar level to some of the guys like Jamal Hill, maybe, or something like that, when I do not agree. I mean, do we not remember what Jiri Prochazka did to Volkan Oezdemir in the first round? Daniel Cormier also beat Anderson Silva, which on short notice, right, 2 days notice, he fought a middleweight who was like 10 pounds under the weight limit. An old Anderson Silva, I don't hold that at the same level of beating Jamal Hill or Jan Blachowicz or Jiri. Only Rumble and Gustafsson are on that level. I'd in fact hold beating Gustafsson and Rumble higher than beating Jan, Jiri, and Jamal Hill. Wait, so there is a counter argument right there. Gus did beat Jan Blachowicz. He was able to wrestle him. And we do have to factor in all the other wins as well, like Patrick Cummins, Dan Henderson, Anderson Silva, Volkan, the second Rumble fight. Man, hold up. Maybe Daniel Cormier is above Alex Pereira. Okay, if you hold Daniel Cormier at number 5 of all-time light heavyweights, then you would have to have Alex Pereira at number 6. But if you have Pereira at number 5, then you have to have Daniel Cormier at number 6. Their legacy at light heavyweight alone, not middleweight and heavyweight, just light heavyweight, they're very, very close. If Alex Pereira beats Jiri Prochazka again. And I was thinking about making my own greatest fighters of all time list. I've made a couple of those videos before, but it has changed, right? With Volkanovski and Usman and Adesanya and all these other fighters potentially being somewhere in the top 15. I think it would be pretty fun. I do think, though, the top 4 greatest fighters of all time are all concrete. Like, you can't have anybody above those top 4 if you're looking at achievements and competition, which I think are the most important things when it comes to greatness. Who you beat and how often you did it at the top, which means title fights, title defenses, all that stuff. So I think Jon Jones, George St. Pierre, Demetrius Johnson, and Jose Aldo, in that order, are the top 4 fighters of all time when you're also including PEDs. I think that's concrete. That's like your Mount Rushmore of greatest fighters ever. Jones, GSP, DJ, Aldo. And then after those top 4, it gets very, very debatable. You got guys like Habib, you got guys like Volkanovski, you got guys like Holloway, Anderson Silva, Fedor, Stipe, Cormier, Cejudo, Cruz, like Dan Henderson, Randy Couture. There's so many different fighters you can list at any part of the top 10 or top 15. I think that's where the biggest debate of the all-time list really go down at. Who is number 5 to number 10, right? That's where the biggest debate is. Top 4, Jones, GSP, DJ, Aldo, that's concrete. There's nobody above those 4. I love Anderson Silva, but he's not greater than Jose Aldo. He's not greater than DJ or GSP either. Volkanovski, close, but he's not greater than Aldo. Because when we're talking about an all-time great list, we're not just talking about featherweight there. We're talking about what Aldo did at bantamweight. We're talking about what Volkanovski did at lightweight and even welterweight. All that stuff. We're looking at everything. Now, the loss at welterweight for Volk against that huge guy that completely dwarfed him, we don't really count that loss that much. I mean, Volk should have lost that fight. It's actually very interesting when you think of the greatest fighters in the lower weight classes and how they would go up against like regional welterweights, middleweights, light heavyweights, bigger guys, right? Like your local regional middleweight that's 10-5 professionally would destroy Sean O'Malley in a fight. And it's not even close. Now, I'm not talking about someone who doesn't know how to fight. I'm talking about an actual guy who trains professionally, but just isn't that good for his weight class, right? He can't make it to even Bellator. He can't even make it to any of the top organizations. He's only fighting regionally. That guy would destroy the best fighters in the lower weight classes that are like, let's say 3 or 4 weight classes below him. Sometimes a lot of people just think, oh, the best heavier guys would beat the best lighter guys, when no, even some mediocre big guys would destroy the best of the best in the lower weight classes. Do you know what Parker Porter would do to Arman Tsarukyan? Do you know what Shamil Gaziev would do to Ian Gary? But funny enough, I was talking with my brother the other day. So my brother has been watching MMA for a very long time. Around the same time I've been watching, and we were having a bit of a debate on who would win in a fight, GSP or Leon Edwards. He believes Leon would knock GSP out or beat him by decision at least. And I'm like, no way, right? I was thinking GSP would probably beat Leon Edwards, but I would say Leon and Usman have the best chance of beating GSP. Prime versus Prime, out of 10 fights, I would say that Usman and Leon are the only two fighters that would probably win like 4 times against GSP, but I think GSP is the best fighter ever at welterweight. Even Johnny Hendricks, if they fought 10 times, GSP probably beats him 7 times out of 10. And when I think about that for all the weight classes, like the greatest fighter of each weight class, how would they stack up against the other best fighters that could potentially beat them? In the heavyweight division, the greatest fighters are probably Stipe and Fedor, but there are some heavyweights that could beat them, right? Francis Ngannou in his prime beats both of them, I think. Jon Jones probably beats both of them. Daniel Cormier probably beats him like 4 times out of 10. Cain Velasquez would be quite difficult for both fighters, but I do think that Stipe would have an easier time beating Cain than Fedor, right? Fedor would have a very hard time with Cain Velasquez. That would be an absolute war. In fact, prime Cain Velasquez could probably beat Fedor more times than Fedor can beat Cain. You also have prime JDS, who could definitely beat both fighters. I would say Stipe beats JDS like 6 times out of 10, but JDS probably beats Fedor more times than Fedor beats JDS. You have prime Overeem. You got a lot of different heavyweights that can definitely beat both Stipe and Fedor. In the light heavyweight division, prime versus prime out of 10 times, nobody beats Jon Jones more. He beats everybody. In the middleweight division with Anderson Silva, there's a lot of middleweights that would beat prime Anderson. I could see Weidman beating Anderson, Yoel Romero, Whittaker. Adesanya could. It's almost 50-50. Alex Pereira could probably beat Anderson. As long as Pereira can keep the fight standing, I think he'd probably beat Anderson Silva. Strickland would be a tough fight for Anderson. There's a bunch of fighters that could beat Anderson Silva out of 10 times. Now, welterweight, GSP's the best. Lightweight with Khabib, I don't think anybody beats Khabib. Even Islam. If they fought 10 times, I would say Khabib beats him probably 6 or 7 times out of 10. At featherweight with Jose Aldo, he loses to Max Holloway, Conor McGregor, Volkanovski, maybe even Ilia Topuria. And do it might be kind of a hot take. Conor McGregor, in his prime at featherweight, not his prime at lightweight, when he was at his best form at featherweight, is probably the best fighter in featherweight history. Who can beat prime Conor McGregor more times out of 10 than he could beat them? I think the fighter that can get the closest is Volkanovski, right? He's the only fighter I can see somebody saying is better than Conor McGregor, because I see Conor beating Jose Aldo more times out of 10. I see him beating Ilia Topuria more times out of 10. I see him beating Max Holloway more times out of 10. Volk is probably the only fighter that might be better than Conor McGregor. Maybe. And I don't even know about that. So it's crazy that Conor beats every single featherweight champion in history. It's just he didn't fight there that long. He didn't defend his belt. He went up to lightweight after. Stylistically, he beats Jose Aldo. Ilia Topuria is probably his easiest fight out of those 4 guys. He has a very good style to beat Max Holloway, but then Volk is a very, very tough fight for Conor. So that may be a bit of a hot take, but we go up to bantamweight. The greatest bantamweight of all time is, of course, Dominick Cruz. And prime versus prime, I think he might be the best bantamweight of all time. The only fighter that I could see beating him is probably Sean O'Malley. Maybe though. Maybe, because I can definitely see Dominick Cruz beating Sean O'Malley. People forget how good Dominick Cruz was in his prime. And people seem to always misremember when Dominick Cruz was in his prime. Whenever I see people talking about when Cruz was in his prime, they always mention when he fought TJ Dillashaw. That was not prime Dominick Cruz. Dominick Cruz's prime ended arguably when he beat Demetrius Johnson, or if he beat Mizugaki. You could go all the way up to Mizugaki, where his prime ended. When he fought TJ a year and a half after Mizugaki, you could see that he was slowing down at that time. The guy went through so many injuries, so many surgeries. I mean, he fought Demetrius Johnson way back in 2011. 3 years later, because of all the crazy injuries, he fought Mizugaki and absolutely destroyed him. He looked very good in that fight, but he was fighting Mizugaki. A year and a half after that, because of injuries, he fought TJ Dillashaw, and he was injured in that fight. He had to shoot up his feet with cortisol because of how messed up his feet were for that fight. If you remember, his feet were all wrapped up and stuff too. And then he was clearly slowing down when he fought Uriah Faber after that. Look at the difference of Dominick Cruz when he fought Uriah Faber the 3rd time compared to when he fought him the 2nd time. The 2nd time he fought Faber, Dominick Cruz was in his prime. The 3rd time he fought him, right after he beat TJ, he was way slower than before. He was way more plodding. He was more sluggish with his punches. Where in the 2nd Faber fight, the guy was scrambling like crazy, much better footwork, extremely fast. So when you're looking at prime Dominick Cruz, go up to the point where he fought Demetrius Johnson, or maybe even when he fought Takeya Mizugaki. That was the end of prime Dominick Cruz. People always incorrectly look at the TJ Dillashaw fight to see how good Dominick Cruz in his prime was, when that was after his prime. So prime Cruz, I think, probably beats every single bantamweight, except he could lose to Sean O'Malley and he could also lose stylistically to Renan Barão and maybe Jose Aldo. Even the Jose Aldo at 135, like that style is so hard for Dominick Cruz to fight. That's why Renan Barão was probably the hardest matchup for Dominick Cruz out of any other bantamweight in history. Insane takedown defense, very good leg kicks, good counter punching, physically strong with a very solid base. But the only thing is Renan Barão gets beat by TJ Dillashaw. He gets destroyed by Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley is the worst matchup for prime Renan Barão. Corey Sandhagen beats him. Peter Yan is a very tough fight for Renan Barão. These elusive fighters that can fight Renan Barão from long range are the guys that would beat him. But then for flyweight, when you look at Demetrius Johnson, I think prime Henry Cejudo always gives him a very close fight. Prime Davison Figueiredo and prime Brendan Moreno are very tough fights for DJ, but DJ is probably the best bantamweight of all time. His hardest fight is either Henry Cejudo or Brendan Moreno, right? Cejudo has the wrestling to stop the takedowns, and he can even take down Henry Cejudo, overpower him. He has the punching power. He's physically stronger than DJ. And for Brendan Moreno, he's a very good scrambler. If DJ does take him to the ground, he has an excellent long jab. He's bigger than DJ. Technical boxing, very good lead left kick. Brendan Moreno in his prime is a very difficult fight for Demetrius Johnson. And Pereira is saying that he wants to take a short break after 303. A short break for most champions is like a year or two, but a short break to Alex Pereira is only 5 months because he says he wants to fight in November or December. What a champion this guy is, man. And if he beats Jiri Prochazka, he might fight for the heavyweight championship very soon. Now, he has to get the Ankalaev fight out of the way. Not only is Ankalaev the number one contender, or at least the contender to the belt, but it's a wrestler, right? We want to see what Alex Pereira can do against a wrestler at this point. He fought Jan Blachowicz, but Blachowicz' wrestling has never been that great. At least not on the level of Magomed Ankalaev. And if he can get past someone like Ankalaev, then I think he would be ready to go up to heavyweight. That would be 3 title defenses, which I think is the requirement, or should be the requirement to go up a weight class. He goes and fights Tom Aspinall, and I think Aspinall would beat him, but what if Pereira catches him with an uppercut when Aspinall's trying to go for a takedown? Or Aspinall's trying to box with him momentarily and gets caught and dropped right away. Or from the preparation and fighting Magomed Ankalaev, his wrestling defense in general has reached new heights, and he could actually defend takedowns against Tom Aspinall. I don't think that would happen, but that's why it's good to see him fight a wrestler before he jumps up to heavyweight. Because not only is Tom Aspinall good at takedowns, but so is Jon Jones, and Curtis Blaydes is also fighting for the title, so you got 3 fighters up there that can all wrestle Alex Pereira. So if Pereira beats Jiri Prochazka, he's got to fight Magomed Ankalaev, and then he's got to go and fight Tom Aspinall. And he's probably the main character, so he might pull it all off and become the greatest fighter of all time. If he beats Jiri Prochazka, Magomed Ankalaev, and then Tom Aspinall, he has to be regarded as one of the greatest fighters of all time. One of them. And absolutely the greatest combat sports athlete ever, if he isn't already. First 3-division champion, defeated 6 UFC champions throughout his career, beat one of them twice, with Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya, Jiri Prochazka twice, Jan Blachowicz, Jamal Hill, then Tom Aspinall. It's a very steep hill to climb, but he's already over halfway up there. And with the whole Conor McGregor pullout, Alexander Volkanovski was actually looking to step in to fight anybody. Could you imagine Volk versus Michael Chandler at 170 pounds? Volk's long-awaited return to welterweight, but I don't know if he would have been able to beat Michael Chandler at 170 on short notice. That would have been a very tough fight for Volk. And with that, let's go right to the first question by Troy Hartung. You mentioned earlier that you like Nick Diaz's chances against Vicente Luque in their upcoming match. If he wins and performs very well, who else do you think he could beat in the top 15 at 170 pounds? And if Nate Diaz were to also come back, are there any fights where you would like his chances against anyone in the top 15 at either 155 or 170? If there aren't any, then should Nate not even come back to the UFC at all? Yeah, I like Nick's chances against Luque, especially after seeing how Vicente Luque performed against Joaquin Buckley and even RDA. He was just covering up on the ground when Buckley was landing hammers on him. No urgency to get back up to his feet, not trying to pull him into the guard or sweep him, reverse him somehow, change the position, turtle up, anything. Like, he wasn't doing anything except just covering up. And the guy wasn't even hurt. Joaquin Buckley did not rock him or anything like that. And Luque just accepted defeat right from there. Now, Nick Diaz also did quit on himself when he fought Robbie Lawler the second time. But the difference is, at least Nick went toe-to-toe with Robbie Lawler for like a few rounds before he got clipped and then quit. Him getting that brain hemorrhage in that Jeff Neal fight completely changed Vicente Luque. He should not be fighting. His brain was literally mashed up. He should not be taking punches to the head anymore. So I could see Nick Diaz landing good punches, overwhelming him with output, and then Vicente Luque just lays there and gets TKO'd or something. Kind of similar to what happened with him and Joaquin Buckley. Is it possible, though, Luque can wrestle him and beat him in that way? Maybe. Nick is old. He hasn't fought in a long time, man. He's been very inactive. But I still don't think that's as bad as someone who literally had a life-threatening experience in one of his fights. When your brain starts leaking, man, I'm not a doctor, but man, I don't think that person should be taking punches anymore. And isn't that crazy how that works? Brain damage is just different for everybody. You got guys like Luque who went through so many wars, got TKO'd in one of his fights against Jeff Neal, and has literally changed him as a fighter. Then you got guys like Max Holloway who eats punches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they just cannot get knocked out at all. Then you got guys like Alistair Overeem who get knocked out every weekend, and they're okay. They're not slurring their words, they're not punch drunk. Overeem still seems quite intelligent in his interviews, very clear-headed. And then you got guys like TJ Grant and Chris Holsworth where they get one concussion and it literally ends their entire fighting career. But no, other than Vicente Luque, I do not have Nick Diaz beating anybody else in the top 15. The only reason I can see him beating Luque is because Luque is just not the same fighter anymore. If this is prime Luque, I have him beating current Nick Diaz. But honestly, Nick, Luque, Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson, like all these guys should retire, man. They're way too old or brain damaged to be continuing it, in my opinion. And I'm not saying Luque's brain damage as an insult. I'm talking about like for real. This guy was medically examined for a brain hemorrhage. This guy almost got unalived by Jeff Neal, and he clearly has not been the same since. Even in his win against RDA, he did not fight anywhere near like he usually does. He was wrestling his way to victory, which I understand because RDA does have a problem with bigger fighters who wrestle him at 170. And it's sad, man, because Vicente Luque has always been a big fan favorite. I've always loved watching him fight. But that style that he had, man, that go to war, carry your battle axe into the battlefield kind of style, caught up to him. And very early in his career as well, much earlier than most fighters. This is the same guy who would not move his head at all when Wonder Boy is just beaming him in the face. This is the same guy who went to war with Brian Barberina. Jeff Neal destroyed him. Like, it's so sad that a fighter like him, who's so exciting and everybody always loved to watch him fight, has completely changed as a fighter because of how his style was. Now, as for Nate Diaz, no, I don't see him beating anyone in the top 15 of either 155 or 170. He might be able to beat Vicente Luque as well for the same reasons that Nick could beat him. But no, Nate Diaz should not be fighting anybody in the top 15 of either 155 or 170 if he ever comes back to the UFC. Like, can you imagine what Dustin Poirier would do to him? I know that's a fight a lot of people wanted back in the day. Right now, though, Dustin would absolutely destroy Nate Diaz. Then we go to Nick Beatty, most surprising champions in history. Matt Serra, after he beat GSP, was insane. I didn't watch it live, but even the thought of that guy being champion is crazy. No disrespect, but nobody expected it. Sean Strickland beating Adesanya to win the middleweight title at the time felt crazy because it was arguably the biggest upset in a championship fight. In hindsight, though, it does make a lot more sense considering Strickland's style versus Adesanya's style. TJ Dillashaw beating Hembarao back in the day was insane. He was like a 5-1 underdog or something. It was crazy how he was able to not only beat him, but dominate Hembarao at the time. Nobody expected that, except one of my friends. He actually picked TJ to beat him at the time. We all thought he was crazy. I'm not gonna lie, Glover Teixeira winning the light heavyweight belt was a bit of a shocker, at least to me, considering how old he was at the time. And it seemed like Jan Blachowicz was just operating at a different level, like in the prime of his career, and Glover rocks him and then eventually submits him. One of the oldest champions in UFC history. Back in the day, Randy Couture defeating Tim Sylvia was crazy. The size difference between them was something out of a cartoon. Brandon Moreno becoming the flyweight champion after knowing that he was cut from the UFC. Even when he came back, it was quite difficult to see him beating Deiveson Figueiredo, to be honest. At least that was my opinion at the time. So those are some that come to mind. And then we go to Mike Griffith. We all know as you get older, age starts to slow you down. Here's my question: if Conor were to rematch Floyd Mayweather, how would it go? Keep in mind, Floyd is almost 48 years old. The last time they fought, Conor did pretty well. Let's say Conor gets like 8 months of preparation. Let's say he trains with Canelo to help him prepare. Let's say he trains with Colby for his cardio. Is it that crazy to say Conor would probably beat Floyd if he trains with those types of guys? No, Conor's not beating Floyd, especially because, yeah, Floyd might be 48 years old, but the guy's barely taken any damage in his career. And he lives quite a healthy lifestyle, right? He's not the kind of guy that parties and drinks and has all these crazy vices destroying his body. I think he still goes on a run at like 4 a.m. still. Eats healthy, works out all the time. Floyd is not your normal 48-year-old boxer. And even at that age, he still beats Conor McGregor because Conor's gotten older as well. He is like 34, 35, and Conor's been partying So he's been doing the opposite of Floyd. Like, Conor may be about 14 years younger than Floyd by age, but by lifestyle, how much younger is Conor than Floyd really? Bro's face is planted in white powder, downing whiskey every weekend, plowing blonde whales at the club every weekend. The man's living the Midwestern man's dream. As a man from the Midwest, I've seen plenty of you guys, man. I've seen plenty of us go for those kind of women, man. It's crazy. Even the guys with money and stuff, like, they still go for those kind of women. It doesn't make any sense to me. I guess it's just their type, whatever. Conor likes them as well, man. So if a guy that rich, that famous, wants to go for that, I don't judge, man. As they say, more cushion for the pushing. But yeah, Conor's not being Floyd at all. No way. Even if Conor got trained by Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali, there's no way he's being Floyd Mayweather. And then your second question. When a guy takes a lot of damage to the head, he comes back not being the same. Tony Ferguson, for an example. You notice how different Colby Covington looks in his fights now. Could it be whatever Masvidal did to him in the streets might have changed him? Right after Masvidal did that to him in the restaurant, Colby went missing for like 5 to 6 months and then came back and he was more gun shy than ever. You think Masvidal had something to do with that? Yeah, I can see it, man. Like I said before, concussions is a very, very weird thing. And apparently Colby did get a concussion. His tooth was knocked out and stuff. He got sucker punched. And as Masvidal likes to gloat, he's got the best sucker punch in Florida or whatever he said. Bro, TJ Grant and Chris Holdsworth literally stopped fighting because of a concussion. So it would not surprise me Colby is just not the same fighter after that. And the thing is, Colby says it was because his foot got broken or whatever when he fought Leon. And that's why he wasn't able to fight the same. Maybe he couldn't push off his feet for punches or drive for takedowns and stuff, but I don't buy it, man. I don't buy it. This is the same guy who got his jaw broken by Kamaru Usman and then came back to win the next round, was winning the 5th round before he got dropped. If a broken jaw is not stopping you from engaging your opponent toe-to-toe, getting aggressive and you doing your usual style, I would think that same guy would at least try to put the pressure on Leon Edwards, because putting pressure on Leon with that wrestling style and the overwhelming boxing works way better than it did when he fought Kamaru Usman. The styles are so different. Leon's much better at counterpunching. He's not as physical as Kamaru Usman is. He doesn't have that wrestling style either. Usman's got tremendous power in his hands. He's a guy who fights with pressure, whereas Leon, he likes to fight on the back foot a lot of times, you know? And that allows Colby Covington to get a lot more pressuring with his style. What he did against Kamaru Usman works way better against Leon Edwards. But he fought the opposite style against Leon. He was moving away. He wasn't engaging him. He wasn't putting the pressure on him. Now, we don't know 100% if the thing with Jorge Masvidal has changed Colby, if it was the injury or whatever it was. We're going to know in his next fight against whoever that is. Maybe it's Charles Oliveira, but Charles is going to put a lot of pressure on him, so Colby's going to have to respond in a similar kind of way, and Charles got very dangerous submission skills, so if he shoots too aggressively, he could get countered by some kind of guillotine or a triangle choke or something insane that Charles Oliveira will pull on you, like a ninja choke or a Peruvian necktie, Dars choke him. Like, there's so many things that Charles can submit you with. It's a very dangerous style for Colby Covington to get back to his usual aggressive style against. If he is still the same fighter though, which I don't know if he is. Then with the Blake Powell, why did my parents break up when I was 8? Was it my fault? It was all your fault. You should never have been born. Your parents never wanted you. You being present caused the division of your parents and broke up your family. It's all your fault. You were born from pre-cum. You were a mistake. And that's why I broke up with her. It is your fault. She went with you during one of the boxing sessions and you were throwing looping punches when someone was throwing straight punches at you. And she had the gall to tell me that looping punches beat straight punches. How could I not divorce her for that? That's why we broke up, son. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry, man. For real, though, it is a big problem. It's like more common now, right? I think it's over a 50% divorce rate in the United States, at least, which is insane. I mean, the nuclear family is literally the foundation, the bone structure, the spine of the country. And if that gets put together, you know, if the nuclear family gets fixed, I think a lot of other things in society will get put together correctly. But a lot of the stuff that you're getting fed in the media, they're causing a separation of the man and woman in America amongst many different kinds of communities, and they break up the family specifically different depending on the community that's targeted. The ideology of a certain community is going to get attacked in a certain way, but it's a slow process, man. In the past like 10 plus years, this country has been shat on by a lot of messed up ideology, and I think it's reached a breaking point where everybody's just fighting back against it now. It's like something I talk about with my friends sometimes. When the common folk, when the middle class gets pushed one way for so long, the pendulum is going to swing back the other way very hard. But here's what I project. A lot of things are going to be swung the other direction that a lot of people want right now. But then eventually, like 15, 20 years, maybe even 30 years from now, it's going to get swung back similar to how it feels now or even like 5 years ago. I think the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth throughout time. And this happens politically as well, if you actually notice with all the presidents. For decades, president after president has been Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. It's been switching off from people, not necessarily presidents that had 2 terms. But for an example, we have Biden right now, right? It looks like a lot of people want Trump or some kind of Republican as the next president. I might be out of the loop. I'm not too political. It's just something I'm noticing throughout history, at least. So historically speaking, right now we have Biden. Before we had Trump. Before that we had Obama for 2 terms. Before that, we had Bush for 2 terms. Before that, we had Clinton. Then we had George H.W. Bush. Before that, we had Jimmy Carter. It keeps swinging back and forth, politically even, with the Republican and Democrat parties. But man, the nuclear family needs to get fixed. And maybe this sounds red pill. Now, I'm more of a traditionalist. I'm not red pill, but a lot of the stuff the red pillers do say is fact. It is real. But I think the traditional route is the best route to go to for things to finally come back the way it's supposed to. Then we go to the honeycomber. Hey, Weasel, looking at some of the famous career downfalls in MMA, what would you have done to prevent or salvage them if you were their coach? What would you have changed or fixed about their fighting style and gaps in their game, as well as their manager? What fights would you have advised them to take and when? So first, Tony, after the Gaethje fight, well, we're making sure he's never cutting weight twice again. And we're probably taking a bigger step down in competition than going up against Charles Oliveira. But it's quite understandable why he fought Charles after. He was still one of the top-ranked fighters. Charles on his way up. Stylistically and technically, in hindsight, it's hard to know what Tony could have done to beat Oliveira. Maybe not back up as much. Maybe actually go toe-to-toe with Charles. Exchange with him a bit. But to do so after getting damaged so badly from Gaethje might be too much to ask for Tony Ferguson. So go to toe-to-toe with Charles. If he loses that one, going to the Beneil Dariush fight, Tony's got to be a lot more pressuring than he was. When he fought Dariush, he was moving back a lot. He was like the most gun-shy we've ever seen him. And if he loses that one, for sure he's not fighting Michael Chandler. After losing to Charles and Beneil, he's got to take a big step down in competition. He needs a tune-up fight at that point. And if not, retire by then. Dominick Reyes after the Jan fight, he needed like a mental coach or someone to get him mentally back in track. Something happened to Dominick Reyes mentally after he lost to Jon Jones. Stylistically and looking at his skills, everything seemed to be quite intact with when he fought Jiri Prochazka, and even somewhat when he fought Ryan Spann. And knowing how good Jiri Prochazka has become, it's not a shocker that Dominick Reyes lost to Jiri. And then Anderson Silva after the Diaz fight or the second Weidman fight. Retire. Anderson Silva should have retired after, especially after the Diaz fight. He was clearly not the same guy anymore. He was older, coming off the leg injury, and he accomplished more than most fighters ever would. So Anderson Silva should have retired after his long career of 10 title defenses, a 16 fight win streak, losing to Chris Weidman, or the no contest in Nick Diaz because he popped for PEDs in that fight. If he never fought Nick Diaz, nobody would have ever said that Anderson was a cheater. Darren Till after the Woodley fight. I think this one's pretty obvious, but we'll go with it. Big step down in competition. Enormous step down in competition. He should not have been at the top of the rankings fighting Tyron Woodley at that time. He needed way more time to grow as a fighter. And it's understandable why he was pushed so quickly. In fact, a lot of the fans even liked the idea of Darren Till fighting Tyron Woodley back then. But now in hindsight, he probably should not have fought Wonderboy when he did. In fact, he probably shouldn't have fought Donald Cerrone when he did. But after the Woodley fight, I think he should have fought someone at the lower end of the top 10 or top 15 instead of being put in a sink or swim point of his MMA career. He needed way more time in order to hone his skills, and I think that could have also been done after the Tyron Woodley fight, in my opinion. Alexander Volkanovski right now, that's a tough one because it really comes down to, does he want to fight Ilia Topuria again? Or at least get the immediate rematch, but he could take up a tune-up fight because he is in a unique position where he's been knocked out twice within a couple months, and he's not young either. You know, this is a guy who's been dropped multiple times throughout his career, but he wants that immediate rematch against Ilia Topuria where he might get knocked out again. What he could also do though is fight someone lower on the top 10, but the only thing is the title fight with Topuria could get passed up at that point. He doesn't have a lot more time in the game, so maybe Alexander Volkanovski should take the Topuria fight and try to win whatever way he can. If he goes into that fight, he's got to stop throwing high kicks right away. He has to make that kind of his trump card. Come out with the jabs, the low kicks, don't get backed up too much. don't get past the black lines. If he sees himself getting around that area, he could start to pressure Ilia Topuria back a bit, especially off the jab and that reach advantage that he has. And on those occasions where he sees the opening, he could throw out those high kicks to try to connect on Ilia Topuria. The only difficult thing about that now is Topuria knows he's going to be throwing high kicks like that, so maybe he could push Topuria back with the takedowns though. Maybe he can trip up Topuria that way, a technique that he probably wouldn't expect from Volkanovski. And that can open up the hands from Volk, and it creates a whole different dynamic for Volkanovski to attack Topuria with. And then any other fighter off the top of your head that interests you that I forgot to mention? There's a couple, but we can move on to the next question. Love the content, man. Keep it up. Thank you so much, man. Then we'll go to the worst box. Anything you have planned for a 400,000 subscriber special? Nothing really planned. The only thing I want to do are those watch parties, and I did talk with some of my friends that I wanted to have on there, and it looks like one of them can't really make it consistently, so maybe I do the watch parties by myself, and then maybe for the big cards that my friends could come around, I think we could do the watch party with them, so it's gonna be pretty fun. But what do you guys want? If I do the watch parties by myself originally, let's say for the fight nights and stuff like that, do you guys want it to be face cam, or do you guys like it like this, where you guys can only hear my voice, which is quite different? But I'm curious on the feedback from you guys on that. Then with the pow pow, you know what? Even if I ask a question, it won't end up on the video. Weasel, you're the GOAT, bro. Been a massive fan of the channel and have leaned or learned so much about MMA and fighting in general from you. Wow, thank you so much, man. And yeah, of course, if you get more likes on your comments, I'll answer those on the podcast. So I appreciate the kind words, man. I try my best to educate and show something pretty cool that maybe you guys haven't really seen and explain it in a way that, it makes sense. And this could be like the most advanced techniques or stuff that's usually explained in a more usually explained with like advanced terminology, but I try to break that down so like everybody could kind of understand it. And I'm so grateful, so glad that I was able to help you learn so much more about the sport. Then we go to Isaac. What's more fragile, Jon Jones' ego or Dominick Cruz's knee? You're about to get me going on this Cruz knee stuff, huh? SpongeBob memes are gonna come back. It's pretty close because Jon Jones was out for 3 years, and he's still not coming back to fight Tom Aspinall, whereas Dominick Cruz, because of his knees, he was out for 3 years. So it's pretty close, man. But Dominick Cruz is way tougher because his knees have been blown out from every angle, and the guy still was able to compete after. Whereas Jon Jones, this guy wants to fight old men because of his ego. Dominick Cruz came back and fought TJ Dillashaw, one of the greatest bantamweights ever, after all the destruction of his knees happened. After all that destruction on his knees. Now, to be fair, the greatest fighter of all time does usually have an ego, at least of any sport or any field. The best usually have some kind of ego, but maybe not Messi. I don't know too much about Messi, but he seems like a very humble guy, and he's the GOAT. So we do at least have one humble king in sports. But I don't understand the whole thing with Jon Jones, and he's trying to make fun of Tom Aspinall now. This is the same guy that's avoiding him. How are you making fun of somebody, saying that he got lit up by Curtis Blades, and you don't even want to fight him, and he's the champ of your division? And the funny thing about it is, when you actually look at the Curtis Blades fight with Tom Aspinall, barely any of those punches from Blades landed. A lot was thrown and a lot were missing. Go back and watch that fight in slow motion or zoom it in, whatever you gotta do, to see the punches missing Tom Aspinall there. But Jon Jones trying to make it seem like Aspinall's getting destroyed by Curtis Blades. And do what the funny thing is, Jon Jones probably doesn't even want to fight Curtis Blades. Crazy. Then go to Who's House Football. Fantasy matchups, everyone in their prime. Max Holloway versus Khabib, gotta go with Khabib. Islam versus Eddie Alvarez, gotta go with Makhachev. Anthony Pettis versus Conor, definitely going with Conor. Jiri Prochazka versus Jon Jones, definitely going with Jones. Justin Gaethje versus Nate Diaz, I will go with Justin Gaethje. Nate is not checking those leg kicks. Stipe Miocic versus Cain Velasquez, I'll go with Stipe. Sharper boxing. Cain doesn't have great head movement. Kamaru Usman versus Robbie Lawler, I probably go Usman, but that's a very good fight. George St. Pierre versus Wonderboy, gotta go with George St. Pierre. And Jorge Masvidal versus Tyron Woodley. In their prime, I'd probably go with Woodley. I see Woodley catching Jorge with a big overhand. And then final question, why do so many people downplay Islam's win streak and success? Brendan Schaub this week on his podcast literally went on a 20-minute rant going off on Islam, saying he's fought no one and downplayed the Dustin win. Really? But the week before, he picked Dustin to beat him. He even picked Volk twice to beat Islam, but after Islam beat him twice, Brendan Schaub said, oh well, he's just a 145er, failing to mention that Volk was the pound for pound #1 fighter at the time that Islam beat him. He even said this week Islam's win over Charles meant nothing because Charles always loses, but fails to mention that Charles on a 12-fight win streak, finishing the top 5 in the division until he met Islam, who destroyed him. Brendan Schaub still doesn't give Islam credit, and the same went for Khabib. Why do Islam and Khabib get so much hate? Is it jealousy? Interesting question. Now, I think most people at this point give Islam and Khabib their credit for how great they were, but there's still some people out there that don't. And I do see at times people say that Volk was just a 145er, right? He was just so much smaller, when it's true that he was 145er, but they both weighed almost the exact same. That's what ultimately matters. Even if he is a 145er, if him and the lightweight he's fighting are almost the exact same weight, this is not a 155er versus 145er anymore. If Drew Dober fought Colby Covington and came into that fight heavier than Colby at 170, is anybody going to say Drew Dober is a 155er? No, nobody would say that. If Volkanovski, for an example, weighed in the 160s, stepping into the cage against Islam, where Islam weighs, let's say, in the high 170s, okay, that makes a lot more sense. But the fact that they were like a couple pounds apart from each other, those guys are pretty much the same weight. And the reason, now Brendan Schaub, who I haven't talked about in a very long time, he might just be rage baiting, honestly. There's a lot of that happening. People having the most outrageous takes just for engagement. So that's the funny thing about Schaub saying that Islam didn't beat anybody, when he picked every one of those guys to beat Islam. So what did he think? Did he just think that all the fighters involved were bad? Dustin's not a good fighter, Volk's not a good fighter, Islam's not a good fighter, Charles is not a good fighter. Is that what he just thought, that all these guys were just trash? When in reality, Dustin, Charles, Volk, and Islam are like top 10 most skilled fighters in the UFC. Volkanovski was pound for pound number 1, Charles was top 3 pound for pound, and he beat both of those guys back to back. Not even Jon Jones can say he's done that, who Brendan Schaub completely glazes every chance he gets, and I know Jon Jones really loved that glazing. Him saying that Charles loses to everybody, that's why Islam beating him doesn't mean anything, where Charles Oliveira defeated most of the top 5, and even after he lost the belt, he had wins over 4 fighters in the top 7 before he fought Arman Tsarukyan. Charles Oliveira came the closest to cleaning out his division than any other lightweight in history. But that's the guy who loses to everybody. Bro, most of his losses are at 145. That was ancient history. And I don't understand why he's downplaying the Dustin win. That's crazy. Dustin was more prepared against a wrestler when he fought Islam Makhachev than ever before in his entire career. So no, the Dustin win is absolutely a big win. Volk wasn't just a 145er. That's crazy to say. And no, Charles doesn't always lose. This is the reality about Islam Makhachev. Islam is the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world, and most people agree with that. He's extremely skilled. He's a great striker, a great grappler, one of the most well-rounded fighters in the sport. He's exciting, always looks for the finish. He's a funny guy that seems to get along very well with others. And that's the other thing. He's putting a lot of effort into not only becoming the best fighter in the world, but even to become a fan favorite. He's learned English. He's always making jokes. He's always trying to finish fights. Like, he's doing everything that the fans ask for any fighter to do. Islam is literally checking off the box for all the requirements that a fan wants out of a fighter. He's one of the few fighters that have the whole package. Guys like Islam, guys like Volkanovski, guys like Alex Pereira and Jiri Prochazka, like, these are the kind of fighters that the fans ask for. Now we could say, why doesn't Pereira learn English? Well, Pereira's a very unique in that way where him learning English is probably not required. Just for him, it's better that he doesn't speak English for some weird reason. In fact, if he just didn't talk, people love it when he's just standing there and looking confused and he lets out his grunts. If this guy just spoke in grunts, it wouldn't change anything. But for most other fighters, you know, learning English, trying to finish fights, becoming highly skilled, being funny, having charisma, all that stuff, that's what the fans want. That makes a fighter the full package, right? That's what Conor McGregor was in his prime. And he hit that at a whole different level. So we appreciate other fighters that naturally do the same thing. And it's not fake. And that's pretty much the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to give this video a like. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. And I'll see you guys in the next video.